Welcome to this episode of the Magellan Network Show. Today, we're going to do episode 368. We're going to continue our summer scaling series. So, again, these are strategies to go ahead and transform your practice. And whether your practice is a $500,000 top line practice, $1 million top line practice, $3 million top line practice, all these strategies are applicable to you. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Coach Joe Lucas. And for 32 and a half years now, I've done nothing but coach some of the most successful advisors and teams in our industry. So, what I want to cover in this episode is talking about minimums, floors, and standards. Because here's the bottom line in terms of growing your business or scaling your practice. You must continue to raise your standards as an operator, as an owner, as a leader. And this is where I think a lot of advisors fall into some traps, right? So we're going to talk about how to compress time, because the reality is you can do things linearly, like we've talked about in the previous episodes, right? Grow at 10 to 15% a year. And let's just be very clear on the concept of growth. And I know a lot of advisors these days I run across are very comfortable. They've kind of won the game they were playing and they never created another game. And you get bored. I was talking to an advisor actually this week, referred in, and pretty young guy, late 30s, early 40s, doing right around $1 million a year of top line revenue, himself and an assistant. And, he lives a good life. Kids play Little League, and, he's super comfortable. And, and the challenge with being comfortable in this game is that you stop trying to win. You go to yourself and say, this is good enough. And the second you think you're done, you start backsliding. Because hear me out. I mean, if you think about there's two forces that are always at work here, irregardless of the market. Number one, you're going to have clients that die. It just happens, and depending how long you've been at this game, chances are you're probably going to more funerals than weddings these days. The second thing is that, have you really looked at your RMD pool, right? How many, what percent of your assets come out just because of RMDs every year, right? So you take those two, I mean, typically you've got to grow at 10% a year just to kind of, break even on the asset growth. Now, when the markets are good, it hides this, right? And I've always said good markets hide all faults, right? All flaws in the business. And I think a lot of advisors feel pretty good about their game, but if you really look at it, it's not because of what you're doing. It's because of just how the markets have been the last couple of years. I mean, strategically speaking, there's always these little dips and peaks and valleys and things like that. So you're never as good as you think you are. Conversely, you're probably never as bad as you think you are either. But here's what I do know. Being comfortable is very dangerous in this game. Now, if you live a lifestyle that is below your revenue means, which is great, and I subscribe to that concept also, that rule, you've got to invent another game for yourself. And the game that I normally like to build for advisors, I'm very good. It seems like the last several years I get a lot of advisors who are just comfortable. They're already successful, but they want more, but they don't know why they want it. And a lot of times it's like, well, I'm not willing to pay the price. I said, what's the price? Freedom. Right? Look, I would submit to pretty much 90% of my audience that one of the reasons why you became an advisor is you wanted two things: time freedom and economic abundance. And this is really the only profession you can have both. Lawyers have to lawyer, doctors have to doctor, CPAs have to do the CPA thing, right? Consultants have to consult, right? Even me as a coach, right? 32 and a half years, I still have to play the game, right? I still have to see clients. I still have to put time into my game. I don't have the leverage of AUM, right? And things like that. So my point is, I think a lot of advisors, they get jaded. They take this game for granted. Like, well, this is okay. I'm kind of sucky. And then, like, dude, you're making $500,000 a year and you work 3 hours a day. Like, what are you bitching about? Right. And sometimes we just need a reality check. So let's just talk about how to compress time. How do we take a goal? And so let's say, how do we take a 10-year goal, shrink it down to 5 years or 3 years? Like, what does that look like? What do we need to do to compress time? And if you really think about it, it comes down to being very, very focused on a few things. There's only a couple ways to grow your business, right? There's tactical growth and strategic growth. Tactical growth is going to be optimization of current clients, other products and services, referrals and introductions, right, to new households, things like that. And that is a critical part of the game. Okay. You have to be fundamentally excellent at that. Not good or it's okay once in a while, but like really building a machine, really building that referral machine. Also, in terms of that kind of growth, if you're doing any kind of a lead gen program, whether you're doing seminars, digital marketing, pay to play ads, things like that, that would all fall under the tactical umbrella. Strategically is when you start buying practices. And now the question becomes, and I get asked this a lot, do I have to acquire practices to build to grow, really scale my business? The answer is no. It's all a function of timeline. And I've seen advisors buy practices and it becomes an unmitigated disaster. Why? Because they're not organized enough for it. Remember, if you're kind of chaotic and you're kind of flying by the seat of your pants, shooting from the hip, doubling that overnight is not a good thing. So we want to be very clear. So how do we compress time? So we need to be very clear on systems. So we need a system for COIs. We need a system for our referrals and introductions. We need a system for optimization, right? This is not happenstance. This is not luck. Next, we need to make sure that you, the operator, is very clear on what you got you here is not going to get you there. So what do I mean by that? So and this is again another flaw a lot of advisors make, and this is just human nature. So if you're $1 million person, you want to be, let's say, hey, next 5 years, I want to get to 3 million or 2.5 or even $2 million. Doesn't matter. This is what we all do. We look at that goal and we figure out what needs to be done. And then we look at our current self, our current capabilities, and we go into I don't know how I'm going to do that. And then our brain goes, man, we've got no pathway to get this done. So we better just not think about it. Right. And we'll go back to the mean, procrastinate, distract ourselves, so and so forth. What you have to accept as a reality is that you will continue to develop new capabilities, new competencies. You'll start creating more confidence in yourself. So that, like I've always said, when I do intro meetings with advisors, and I find out their numbers and what they want to do, I said, well, we know what the $1.5 million version of you looks like. The real question is, what does the $3 million version of you need to look like, right? And that's really what it boils down. It boils down to identity. It really, really, really does. Okay. And then the other piece is about minimums, and there's two minimums that we always operate in, right? A firm. So again, I'm going to operate under the premise that you're as the owner of the practice are still seeing clients. So you're still playing the game. You're still in that advisor chair, right? You're not just in the business owner and the entrepreneur chair. You're actually still in the advisor chair. So if you're in the advisor chair, there's going to be two minimums. There's going to be a minimum revenue, and again, a lot of advisors where they go sideways. It's not about assets. It's about revenue. Your valuations are not based on how much money you have under management. Your valuations are always going to be a multiple of gross revenue or a multiple of EBITDA or EBOC, period. End of story. So guess what? It's cash, income, top line, not assets. So for your practice, you're going to have two numbers. You're going to have what the firm needs, and that would be like with an associated advisor, if you will, so somebody other than you, right, being lead on that relationship. So that'll be one floor. And then the second floor would be, well, if they're a client of yours. So for example, I'm just thinking of one of my clients real quick. So we have a firm floor of 5,000 a year. Okay. So if somebody comes in with, 350,000, we're going to have to mark it up to about a point and a quarter, point and a half, right? Or a little bit more than that. Or do a true up with a financial planning fee. Well, we've got to get to 5,000. And that's working with an associate advisor on the team. Now, if they want the lead advisor, like my client, my direct client, that's going to be a $25,000 minimum, or keep math simple, 2.5 million at a point, right? So there's always going to be two floors, and everybody here has to establish that. And don't get into the idea, and this is the other thing. There's I don't care what your business card says. Every household has a cost. There's a direct cost of overhead and staff and so like there's hard numbers, and then there's time. So don't think, well, we've got a client and they don't really need much and da 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 da. No, man, there's still a cost there. And we're not even including the scenario where you have, a risk in terms of any compliance or liability that way. Dead money Oh, it's no big deal. It's, it's not advisory. Dude, it's a liability. You're not making any revenue on it, and you're liable for it. The days of just dead money and dormant accounts are over. They've been for a while. So if you got some dead money on your board, don't look at that as an asset. I look at it as a liability, right? And then the other piece is not about being busy. So this is where I think a lot of advisors, when they look to scale their business, they kind of fall into this trap where they think about, well, if I got to double my business, I got to double my energy, I got to double my output, I got to double my time. And the reality is, then you're looking at this all wrong. One of the shifts that I see that has to happen is that you need to not work directly, but work through people for clients. So in other words, instead of you being in the advisor chair, you have other advisors in the chair and you work through those other advisors to scale your business. Right? Does that make sense? So in other words, we either maintain, remember, going back to the last couple episodes, the business owner identity, the advisor identity, and the entrepreneur identity, the three identities that we play in this game. You don't want to expand your advisor identity. In fact, you want to shrink it. You want to shrink that chair ideally. So I do have clients, by the way, who run, $1 billion shops. So let's just call it, $10 million top line, our organization. They have no advisor chair. They're not responsible for any relationships. They are purely CEO, rainmaker, business owner, and they do no reviews. So in other words, we basically have eliminated their advisor chair. So that's always a possibility. Now, for some of you, you may love some of your clients, some of your top 20, top 30, whatever. But I will tell you this: if you want to go from 1 million to 3 million, 3 million to 5 million, 5 million to 10 million, and you think you think in that journey you're going to keep 100, 150, 200 households to yourself, it's not going to happen. It just doesn't. I've never seen it. I'm not saying it doesn't exist out there. This coach has never seen it because it doesn't work. It just doesn't. So this is where this is where you have to evolve as a professional, as an owner, as an entrepreneur to understand, even though you may have been the advisor for the last, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, that chair is going to have to shrink. No question on that, right? Now, what else do we need to do? So we talk about floors, right? And that's for new people coming in, right? We have a firm floor and then a U floor if you're playing that role. Then how about everybody else? How about the legacy? How about the people that have been around for all the clients, right? So again, it boils down to segmentation. You should be segmenting your clients every 12 months at a minimum, right? And here's how I teach segmentation. It's very simple. I know there are consultants that have these elaborate scoring systems, and look, I'm not saying that's bad. I just think complexity creates chaos, and chaos is the last thing we want. So let's keep it simple, okay? And I don't care how you kind of label them, whether you want to go, platinum, gold, silver, bronze, A, B, C, D, triple A, single A, double A, whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter to me, right? Call it what you want. But here's how we break it down. And by the way, all segmentation is done on trailing 12 revenue, not assets. Okay. So what I would do, and I'm going to keep things very simple in our world. Let's say you have 100 households in your business. We're going to look at the top 20%. So in this case, the top 20, and we're going to draw a line on number 20. And we're saying that's our top tranche. Okay. 20%. Okay. And there's your floor on the revenue. So for somebody to be, let's say, an A client, it's going to be top 20% floor. That's not the average, the minimum. Okay, let's be very clear. I'm just talking about minimums, not averages. The next 40%, right, is going to be your B book. Okay. And wherever, so again, this example, so we're the top 20. So now we're going to go down to household number 60. And we're going to draw a line there. And whatever that number is, that is the floor for the B block. Okay. And then the final 40% is going to be the C block. And there's a floor there too, right? Somebody's gonna say, "Well, how about a D? How come we down 4?" I mean, you can do it. You can dice it up any way you like. I think 3, because anything below that is probably transactional or non-existent, or some dead money, and that's a whole different animal. But in terms of like functioning advisory relationships, a top 20 is your first block, next 40% is your second block, last 40 is your third block. So ABC, triple A, double A, single A, platinum, gold, silver, however you want to do it, right? Now, do some of my clients have a fourth block of like legacy transactional? Yeah, they do. We kind of look at that as more of they're not in the model. We don't have financial plans. They're not advisory. They're below our floor, and I don't really like that business, quite frankly. I would advise about getting rid of it. But but here's the bottom line. Some of these are just legacy clients, so we have them. But anyway, you want to go ahead and make sure that every year, at minimum, maybe twice a year, you're always segmenting your book, because that 20% is going to change as you continue to grow, right? From that perspective. Now, why is this important? Profits. You cannot run this business as a nonprofit. If you run it as a nonprofit, you will not have the revenue, the resource to reinvest into hiring better team members, systems, infrastructure. And this is what, by the way, real quick, this is what happens to a lot of advisors. They have I'll keep things simple. They have $1 million top line business. They take home 500,000. And they have a $500,000 lifestyle, maybe 550 lifestyle. And so, in other words, there's like no, I'm not a CPA, but there's like no retained earnings. There's nothing to reinvest back into business. We need every dollar to fund our country clubs and our 3 cars and the boat and all this other stuff. And then we don't have the extra $100,000 a year to go hire the associate advisor. We don't have the $75,000 to go get a rock star CA, right? We don't have that, right? Why? Because we were not prudent as an owner. We got ahead of this. And I can't tell you how many advisors, $500,000 top lines, $1 million top lines, $1.5 million top lines. And I talk to them, and their money's tight. Like, they don't have the resources to reinvest back in the business. And remember something, profits are the oxygen of your business. What is a company worth with no profits? Right? Think about that. So profits matter. They absolutely do. And so what you need to do is a couple things. Number one, you've got to look at the business in a different way as a business, right? So we got to reframe how we look at it. The second thing we've got to do is we've got to focus on how we're going to grow it, right? So in other words, what works? And this gets into uh, a very quick analysis, and this is what I do with all my clients. I think there's a massive, and we've taught, we've heard this language, signal versus noise. And I think a lot of advisors in their marketing and business development get caught up in the noise game. They look around and they do stuff like they're doing and again, I'm not knocking social media, but for most of you, that's not where your clients come from. That's all noise. And here's my evidence. Look at pick a number, 10, 20 new households. Where did they come from? Where did they come from? Chances are, for most of you, again, I do have clients that do seminars. I do have clients that do digital. So it's going to be a little bit different for everybody. But here's the bottom line. Wherever they come from, is that where you're putting your focus? So if they're coming from client referrals, how solid are you with your client referral game? If they're coming from CO, how good are we at that, right? Are we putting all our energy? Or are you ignoring the COIs and ignoring the referral introduction game because you're too busy posting on LinkedIn and doing stupid stuff on Facebook? Focus. High leverage, high output activities, pathways. And then the last part, floor, having standards. Super critical. Minimum standards on households, all those things, right? That's what it boils down to going forward. And what we're going to talk about in the next episode is going to be what I call one of the largest psychological traps that advisors have in terms of determining whether they should scale their business or not. So this is going to be a very interesting conversation. So look forward to that next week. And with that, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen or watch this episode of the Magellan Network Show. Please make sure you subscribe to our channel, our YouTube channel, our podcast, if you're listening to this via podcast. We'd love to get a referral, so send it out to your friends in the game. Leave us a review. That's very, very helpful for us. And if you want any more information about what we do, MagellanNetwork.net. And with that, have a great week. See you all again in 7 days.